Hello and welcome to our first week of philosophy. Philosophy, is, as you've already gone through the assignments and the reading, is a little bit of a unique subject. As I mentioned before in the introduction, it's a very important subject, and our author wants to introduce the concept of logic in the first chapter. Logic is very simple in terms of its construction. For instance, math is a logical tool that we use to understand equations. 1 plus 1 equals 2. We come to a conclusion and we agree to it with certainty. He wants to engage with us in terms with logic being something we use in morality, which is a day-to-day concept in our lives. So this is his point of making that philosophy is very important, and so is logic. So if we were to look at this circle here, we'll call this the moral circle. And we live and we grow within this moral circle. And the circle represents what we as a community decide what is wrong and right as a moral standard. We may not all agree, but we are brought up in these social norms, as I'll explain in a little bit. In order for us to examine our morality, we have to use logic, and that is first introduced by Socrates. So Socrates is going to ask the Athenians of his day about their loyalty to the state, to do things that are absolutely wrong and right, to ignore the law when the state is asking you, for instance, to go to war or to question religion, the devotion of your day-to-day norms. And in order for you to examine your world, you need a kind of basic logic. And the exercise that Socrates is using is to unravel a sort of circular reasoning that appears in most people's understanding of what's expected or what is good and bad. So if he were to ask, using the Socratic method, of what does it mean to be a good Athenian, a good Athenian would answer in a way of saying, well, to do what is right for the state. And then he would question that, for instance, is it okay for a person to do what is illegal in the human sense, but do what the state is asking for them to do? So in this kind of Socratic method, the individual begins to realize that they don't understand really what they're talking about when it comes to nationalism or piety, religious piety. So this separating from the norm of society and this logical use of the Socratic method makes someone feel as if they re-examine their world. Are they going to jump back in, or are they going to question the circle that they're living in, and perhaps change it and even change it in their own personal life? So when it comes to morality, separating yourself, we use this term called ethics in terms of being able to look at things logically and examine what does it mean to be a patriot or to be proud of their country. Does it mean to serve without question, or does it mean to improve the society within? And that's the kind of logical questioning that Socrates brings up. So the unexamined life really means to separate yourself from what is normal in your society and to examine how do you come back into this world and find yourself in a situation sometimes where your society is different, and how do you live within that society and decide to change. He's bringing us this example because although logic is important in understanding statements of truth, when it comes to positive logic of scientific questions to find if something is absolute or certain, it's also important in terms of someone's life and morality. So if we were to go back into America before the 1860s, we would find that the moral right in the South would be that slavery is okay. In fact, you can actually say that in most American communities, they may not have had slavery, but they didn't see slavery as a moral wrong. So they're brought up in a world where slavery is actually the moral right. Okay, so Socrates would like for someone to separate and use a logical explanation of why slavery is wrong. And I'd like for you guys to take a second and think of a logical conclusion or a logical statement of why is it wrong for someone to be a slave. If you were to say, or if a society to uphold slavery, if you were to say that slavery is wrong because it's wrong, and in many different ways you can say it's wrong to own somebody, or it's wrong because it doesn't feel right. This isn't the kind of thing that Socrates is looking for. He's looking for a logical explanation of why something is definitely wrong. I like to make a point, though. He says he doesn't speak much about slavery in his own world, but his future connection, Aristotle being a student of Plato, and Plato being part of the ancient world, they themselves would have been in this circle, and it would have been very challenging for them to come up with a reason why slavery is wrong. The ancient slavery wasn't based on race, but it did exist, and they never really came up with a logical reason why slavery would be wrong. So in the South, of course, slaves themselves would see slavery as wrong, but the South did not have a logical statement of the reason why slavery would be wrong. In fact, in the story of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, we find Huckleberry outside of society as he is rescuing his friend Jim, and he is outside of morality. He feels himself as being a bad boy because of his friendship with Jim. We call this a motivism, meaning motivated by feelings and emotion. So this really isn't an examination, a logical examination of what is wrong or right. But this is a good example of how we may feel outside of what is moral, what society says is moral and right, and we feel that something needs to be changed in a sense. So as much as we may agree with the idea that slavery is wrong and we are behind Huckleberry Finn, Socrates will say that this is not a logical reason for making a certain point of why slavery is wrong. And so in this case, in order for us to want to change society and use logic in the sense of morality, we would have to come up with a statement that is a illogical conclusion of why slavery is wrong. So in the tradition of philosophy, we're going to use a logical statement brought by a philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant, who says that if we are going to participate in morality as a society, we need to be free thinkers and have the freedom to be able to make our logical choices and our ethical choices, and in order for us to have ethics in general. So freedom of the will is required for the creation of our society's morals. We cannot allow people in power or those who have great influence to decide for us what is moral and right. We need to have something that is more standard and more objective, and that's the use of logic. So if we look at Immanuel Kant's point, he says freedom must be present for morality, like I had mentioned before. And secondly, in order for us to have this freedom, others cannot be a means to our ends, meaning that we cannot use others. Now we're using logic, and now we're understanding we're outside of this idea of slavery, and we can logically agree that slavery is not a moral thing to do. And again, this is where logic is different than the emotion the emotional feeling that Huckleberry Finn feels for Jim. This is more of a standard of certainty that this is something that we shouldn't do. Okay, so according to philosophy, sometimes emotion just isn't enough for us to help structure our moral society. But for the purpose of right now, what I'd like to make a point about it is the importance of logic in philosophy. So going back to our discussion questions, sometimes our morality is, just to give you an example, may make the case that money is the means of happiness, or status is the means of happiness. In fact, the goal of learning things is for the idea that everything in the world has a certain value. Can we have a separation if we examine ourselves and realize that may not be the case? I'm just giving you the example of the rejection of consumer materialism as a point that Socrates is making in terms of the unexamined life. So in our examples in the discussion, there's a need to self-reflect on our morals, on our norms of our society, and then find ourselves questioning, hey, I may not totally agree with a concept. Now, whatever example you provide, it's okay. It's just a matter. It's only a matter of coming up with an examination of what is going on and why you find yourself outside of that norm. Okay. So with the issue of abortion, we have the usual norm, and I'm getting a sense from many of our posts that we've already agreed with the court that abortion is right, but we have to examine, why did the court say abortion was right? They didn't address the issue of killing. What logic they used was the right to privacy, and they're not necessarily dealing with the issue of a fetus and its nature of the fetus. So one student had made a post about the straw man fallacy, that a woman's right to privacy is the right to the fetus as an automatic certainty, which is a good example of a straw man fallacy. The point is that the court is not addressing killing. Is abortion killing? What the court is addressing is a right to privacy. And this is why abortion is still and will continue on as an ethical issue of, do we continue and how do we continue with the issue? Because what is not being addressed, because philosophically it's a little bit more stressing to deal with when a person is a person and when we are actually taking a life, versus the courts, I'm going to say, their easy way out of addressing the issue as a right to privacy. So this is an example of when someone may find themselves outside of this ethical issue and find the need for change, or someone may still find themselves that this is a right to privacy, but like I mentioned before, philosophically we still haven't come up with a logical point about the issue of life. To give you an example, and this is just another point of logic, is Aristotle's point of potentiality, meaning that if something by its nature is potentially to be in its essence, then it has a right to be, in a sense. So, and the Catholic Church uses this point about abortion as if a zygote or a fertilized egg has the freedom to be a human being without intervention, then it already has the rights of human beings. Now, this is not a certain logic. This is just one of many schools of logic, but it's just to make the point that we haven't really addressed this issue. Okay, so this topic will continue to be a hot item issue. So through most of our discussions and through most of your journals that you're going to be posting, what I'm really looking for is your example in your life that fits the concept that the author is trying to bring in with our chapters. In our next chapter, in the Pre-Socratics, he moves into a history of philosophy, and the first philosophers were not interested in this moral debate, as Socrates brings us into. They're more interested in nature and the logic of understanding nature. So in your journal, remember the examples are very important. And if you have any questions or emails, please let me know. And good luck.